If you're rolling into your fantasy playoffs with these players, it's time to, well... Welcome back, in-game community. It's Chris, and let's talk about some panic players. And let's start with a big name, DK Metcalf. This was a guy you drafted as a top 5, maybe a top 10 receiver, a guy you expected to carry your fantasy team to glory, and it's just not happening. Ever since Russell Wilson has come back from that finger injury, that connection between him and DK just doesn't seem to be there. And this was the game against Houston that Metcalf was supposed to go off, and he didn't. You know who did go off though? Tyler Lockett on the other side. For whatever reason, that chemistry, that connection with Russ and DK, it's just not there right now. And if you have Metcalf in your lineup, you have to be absolutely panicked at this point. And there are guys I would absolutely start over DK Metcalf if I had him, and I'm sure we'll talk about him in our wide receiver start sit video. All right, let's move on to a running back that we thought would carry us to fantasy glory, especially with his schedule, and that is James Robinson. Why does Urban Meyer hate James Robinson? 6 carries, 4 yards? Look, I know the Jaguars lost, but it wasn't like they were getting blown out by the Titans. Yes, they got shut out, but they were still relatively close in this game. It's crazy to give your best player only 6 carries. It seems like Urban Meyer is trying to get fired. And James Robinson has a great playoff schedule, but you know what? It doesn't matter. You cannot start James Robinson right now. There's just no way he can be trusted unless Urban Meyer somehow gets fired between now and Sunday, which seems unlikely at this point. So panic level through the roof on James Robinson. He can't even be in fantasy lineups during the playoffs. Let's move on to another running back who people scooped up off waiver wire and thought were going to lead them to a potential championship, and that is Chuba Hubbard. Sure, he had a touchdown here in week 14, but that was really all he did. Only 10 carries, but the biggest worry is no pass catches. That was all Amir Abdullah. If he's not going to catch any passes, and he's got Cam Newton vulturing touchdowns, coming in and out of the lineup for PJ Walker in this mess of an offense, there's just no upside for Chuba Hubbard. And if all that isn't bad enough, his playoff schedule is Buffalo, Tampa Bay, New Orleans. No thank you. Cannot start Chuba Hubbard. He is nothing more than a touchdown-dependent running back. And even when he does score a touchdown, as we saw in week 14, he's giving you nothing else. Cannot be trusted in the fantasy playoffs. Let's move on to another wide receiver, Marquise Brown. Remember when he was just lighting fantasy on fire when Lamar Jackson was chucking deep balls every game? Well, over the last few weeks, Lamar Jackson has stopped chucking deep balls. But if that's not enough, now he might be looking at Huntley as his QB for the rest of the season, because unfortunately, Lamar Jackson suffered an ankle injury early in this game and was ruled out relatively quickly. So if he can't go, that means Huntley is in at quarterback. And while Huntley may be a similar runner to Lamar, he's not even close to the same as a deep ball passer. We saw he was targeting Mark Andrews a ton, Rashad Bateman a ton. Rashad Bateman had a monster game. He looks like he could now be that league winner I talked about a few weeks ago with Huntley. Obviously, we got to monitor what's going to happen with Lamar. But if Lamar's not in there, that's going to kill Marquise Brown's value, because Huntley did try to throw it deep to Brown a few times, and they weren't even close to on target. So got to be very panicked about Marquise Brown here if Lamar Jackson can't go. Another guy who's barely startable, has to be on like the wide receiver 3 type of bubble if there's no Lamar. How about a tight end now? Dalton Schultz, another guy earlier in the year, looked like a waiver wire gem, was going to lead teams to championships, teams who didn't draft the tight end. Well, that's kind of disappeared. And what's been the common denominator? The 3 healthy Cowboy wide receivers. There's only been 2 games where we've seen the Cowboys' 3 wide receivers on the field together and healthy. That was week 1 against the Bucs and here in week 14. And in those 2 games, Dalton Schultz has a combined 5 targets and 3 catches. That is not even fantasy relevant. And he wasn't fantasy relevant in week 14. As long as these 3 wide receivers are healthy and on the field at the same time, there's just not enough for Dalton Schultz. He's nothing more than a touchdown or bust tight end at this point who has almost no floor. So I would not want to have to be rolling him in my playoffs with Dalton Schultz in my tight end slot. How about a couple of quarterbacks? Let's start with Dak Prescott. This was a guy drafted as a top 5 QB, was going to lead teams to their fantasy championship. 2 terrible games in a row. And let's not forget, 4 weeks ago, he had an even worse game. Sure, he had a nice game against the Raiders sandwiched in there, but that's the Raiders. That defense is terrible. And here's the thing with Dak Prescott. He's got significant home road splits. He's playing much better at home than on the road. Now, the good news is he finishes the season with 2 home games. The bad news is he has a road game next week, the first round of your fantasy playoffs. So if you don't have a bye next week, I don't think you can play Dak Prescott in such an important game. I think he's going to let you down and get you eliminated from the fantasy playoffs. So if you do have Dak Prescott and you have to play in week 15, I'd be looking elsewhere for my quarterback. And then finally, how about Derek Carr? In the 6 games since the team has had a bye, he has 6 touchdowns and 8 turnovers. Remember when this guy was lighting it up every week, looked like a potential league-winning quarterback, looked like a great quarterback stash in a 1 QB league and a league winner truly in a 2 QB or Superflex league? Well, that is not going to happen. Even if you're in a 2 QB or a Superflex league, I don't think you can start Derek Carr from here on out. Not only is he playing bad, but the schedule is brutal. He gets Cleveland in the first round of the playoffs, then Denver, then Indy in the championship game, if you somehow make it that far with him. So I think Derek Carr is an absolute must sit in all formats for the rest of the fantasy playoffs. All right, guys, that does it for my panic players headed into the playoffs. Hopefully you don't have any of these guys. If you do, good luck. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.